North Korea launched an intercontinental ballistic missile over the East Sea this morning, presumed to be a new type of solid-fuel missile. The regime released its leader's message right after, and South Korea's military issued a stern warning. The defense ministers of South Korea and the U.S. meet in Washington, strongly condemning North Korea's deployment in Russia. The two allies agreed to incorporate responses to a North Korea nuclear attack in their joint military exercises. The race to the White House remains too close to call, with less than a week until Election Day. Tonight, we take a closer look at what the election outcome could mean for the South Korean economy. It's October 31st, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with news of an intercontinental ballistic missile test by North Korea early this morning, presumed to be using a new type of fuel. South Korea's military issued a strong condemnation and urged it to stop harming peace. Park Go-nu has this report.
On Thursday, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said that North Korea test-launched an intercontinental ballistic missile at a high angle toward the East Sea from the Pyongyang area at around 7:10 a.m. It landed after flying approximately 1,000 kilometers. This is the first time in 43 days that the regime had tested a ballistic missile, and it has been 10 months since it launched an ICBM. On the same day, the JCS strongly condemned the North for its provocations.
North Korea's long-range ballistic missile launch is a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions. Our military strongly condemns the Kim Jong-un's regime's illegal and reckless provocations and urges it to stop immediately, as this harms peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and the international community.
The JCS added that North Korea has been engaging in illegal provocations despite repeated warnings from the South, and warned that the North will be responsible for any kind of circumstances that may follow. The North typically launches long-range missiles at a sharp angle to prevent them from flying over neighboring countries. Although further analysis is needed, military officials say that Thursday's missile may have been a new type of solid-fuel ICBM, using a recently unveiled 12-axle transporter-erector launcher. Officials have also emphasized the importance of examining the timing of the missile launch.
It seems the North is trying to gain bargaining power ahead of the U.S. presidential election, while breaking away from being criticized for sending troops to Russia.
The JCS also said related information is being shared with the U.S. and Japanese authorities while increasing readiness. The North usually sends out messages a day after it tests missiles, but on Thursday, in a surprise move, Kim Jong-un delivered a message just 5 hours after the launch. The regime's state media publicly reported that Kim described the launch as an appropriate military action to respond to enemies that threatened them. He also said that Pyongyang will continue to strengthen its nuclear capabilities. Park Go-nu, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has called for close coordination with the international community in response to North Korea's latest ICBM launch. Following a briefing by the National Security Council hours after the launch on this Thursday morning, President Yoon also called for extensive preparation against any unexpected provocation by North Korea. South Korea's National Security Council, for its part, has denounced North Korea's violation of UN Security Council resolutions and has decided to designate fresh sanctions on the regime while working with partners to ensure effective implementation of existing sanctions. Up next, our Choi Min-jung explains how big of a threat the latest launch is, what could be behind Kim Jong-un's prompt comment, and the timing of all this.
North Korea launched its longest-flying intercontinental ballistic missile on Thursday. South Korea's initial analysis has shown that the missile is presumed to be a new solid-fuel ICBM, which, according to Japan, traveled a record 86 minutes, the longest flight time ever recorded by the regime. The missile also reached a record height of around 7,000 kilometers. A professor at Dongguk University noted that this advancement is a threat.
The missile could fly a longer distance than existing ICBMs if it were to be launched at a normal angle. In that sense, it can be seen as an even bigger threat.
Professor Kim explained that such a launch could put the entire U.S. within striking range. The provocation was anticipated by many as the U.S. is approaching its presidential election next week. However, another expert said there's more behind Pyongyang's motives.
The focus on this provocation was more on showing that North Korea is maintaining its defense posture even after the dispatch of troops to Russia, rather than the US presidential election. It's showing that it has sufficient nuclear power to maintain deterrence despite the dispatch of troops.
Meanwhile, Kim Jong-un's prompt comment on the weapons test is also seen as a rare move.
It's very unusual for the North Korean state media to report the ICBM launch so quickly. I think the reason probably lies in their confidence in its success.
Likewise, the North appears to have embedded several strategic aims behind its latest missile launch amid heightened security tensions in the Middle East and on the Korean Peninsula. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
In response to the North ICBM launch, South Korea and the U.S. Air Forces on Thursday conducted large-scale aerial maneuvers as part of the Freedom Flag 2024 exercise. South Korea's F-35A, F-15K, and KF-16 fighter jets equipped with precision-guided weapons flew in formation with U.S. F-35B and F-16 fighters, as well as the MQ-9 unmanned aerial vehicle. The previous day, the forces successfully struck targets simulating the enemy's transporter Orekta launcher. The Freedom Flag exercise is a combined large-force flying exercise between the allies aimed at boosting defense capabilities and readiness against North Korean threats. Over in Washington, the Allies' defense chiefs strongly condemned North Korea for deploying troops to Russia. For the first time, South Korea and the U.S. have agreed to incorporate realistic responses to a North Korean nuclear attack in their joint military exercises. Our Kim Jong-sil reports.
The defense ministers of South Korea and the U.S. strongly condemned in the strongest terms with one voice North Korea's troop deployment to Russia. They made the remarks at the 56th Security Consultative Meeting held in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday local time. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin revealed that North Korea has sent about 10,000 soldiers to eastern Russia, with some reportedly moving closer to Ukraine.
I am increasingly concerned that the Kremlin plans to use these North Korean soldiers to support Russia's combat operations in Russia's Kursk region near the border with Ukraine.
The U.S. Secretary of Defense stated that while he would not speculate on the timing of the deployment, if North Korean troops engage in combat, they will be seen as belligerents and could face casualties. South Korean Defense Minister Kim Yong-yeon emphasized that North Korea's deployment could heighten security risks on the Korean Peninsula.
In exchange for sending troops to Russia, North Korea is likely to demand advanced military technologies, such as enhancing tactical nuclear weapons, ICBM missile development, reconnaissance satellite technologies, and nuclear-powered submarine technologies.
Minister Kim also warned of potential interference by North Korea in the upcoming U.S. presidential election, with Pyongyang likely wanting to exaggerate its presence. For the first time, South Korea and the U.S. have officially agreed to include a scenario involving a North Korean nuclear attack on the South in their operational plans. In the joint statement, they decided that future combined exercises should include appropriate and realistic scenarios, including responses to DPRK nuclear use. The two sides vowed to deter North Korea's nuclear threat with the alliance's overwhelming strength while using sanctions and pressure to, quote, dissuade and delay North Korea's nuclear development. Experts highlight that the shift in language is notable, as previous statements had frequently emphasized denuclearization, a term that was standard until their last meeting.
In the United States, it is also a growing voice that denuclearization itself is not the realistic at all. In that kind of a situation, it is very important the SCM, the mechanism of the South Korea-US alliance should include the denuclearization of North Korea, because this is the ultimate goal for the South Korean defense.
Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
In the U.S., the race remains too close to call as we count down 5 days to the November 5th presidential election. And instead of pledges, the unfortunate use of profanity is emerging as a hot topic. Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
With the 2024 U.S. presidential elections expected to be one of the closest in recent years, a lot of focus is on key battleground states. Among the key battleground states are the three Rust Belt states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. According to a CNN poll released on Wednesday, Vice President Kamala Harris has a slight lead in Wisconsin and Michigan and is tied with former President Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. Harris leads Trump 48% to 43% in Michigan, while she leads the Republican candidate by 6 percentage points in Wisconsin. In Pennsylvania, both candidates had 48%. The three states were all won by Trump in 2016 when he defeated Hillary Clinton, but U.S. President Joe Biden took them back in the 2020 election. As the election is now less than a week away, the race has also been marred by controversial comments by those supporting the two candidates. Trump on Wednesday slammed Biden after the president appeared to call the Republican candidate's supporters garbage, while referencing a controversial comment by a guest speaker at a Trump rally. While the White House insisted the president was not calling Trump's supporters garbage, Vice President Harris seemingly distances herself from Biden's comments.
Listen, I think that, first of all, he clarified his comments, but let me be clear, I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for.
And with such a tight White House race, it leaves very little room for mistakes as the two candidates continue to campaign in key battleground states leading up to next Tuesday's election. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea is bracing for the implications of the election outcome in terms of not just politics and diplomacy, but also the domestic economy and industries. Our economics correspondent Moon Hae-ryun joins us in the studio to tell us more. Hae-ryun, trade and tariffs are key elements here. Walk us through how this might be affected by the election.
Yes, so the two candidates, incumbent Vice President Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump, propose very different tariff policies. Harris supports a targeted tariff strategy affecting specific goods and countries, while Trump plans broad tariffs of 10 to 20% on nearly all imports, with higher tariffs on Chinese goods. His tariffs would replace the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act as a means to incentivize companies to establish U.S.-based operations. This shift has caught the attention of South Korean companies as these laws directly influence their investments in U.S. facilities. The IRA has been giving tax credits to South Korean electric vehicle battery companies such as LG Energy Solution and SK On. The Chips and Science Act gives companies subsidies to build plants in the U.S. Samsung Electronics is due to receive up to $6.4 billion of subsidies to build its foundry in Texas, while SK Hynix is due to receive $450 million in subsidies to build its packaging facility in Indiana. If a future Trump administration cuts subsidies, it would reduce the appeal of South Korean investments in the U.S. and strain their finances. Experts say that this is, however, an unlikely scenario.
In order to remove the subsidies, President Trump will have to remove the laws, and that will require approval from Congress. So not only will Trump have to become the president, but the House of Representatives and the Senate both have to be in Republican hands.
That being said, it's important to think about the intentions behind such statements.
It's unlikely that the CHIPS Act will be brought to a halt, but this is more of a signal to say that he wants more commitment from overseas companies to invest in the U.S.
You talked about a higher tariff on Chinese imports. What impact could the potential trade war between the U.S. and China, have on Korean industries?
Yeah, so Trump has currently proposed a 60% tariff on all Chinese imports to the U.S. and even higher tariffs on Chinese-made vehicles to stop them from entering through Mexico. South Korea closely monitors U.S.-China trade moves as its economy, especially in semiconductors, heavily depends on both markets. Major players like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix rely on exports to both countries as critical parts of global tech supply chains. Here's what an expert said.
The majority of our semiconductors are used in smartphones and computers, with China responsible for 60 to 70% of exports. So this is likely to take a hit.
However, trade tensions with Beijing would likely persist even if Harris were elected. The Biden-Harris administration has targeted tariffs on Chinese EVs, solar cells, and steel and aluminium, as well as finalizing restrictions on U.S. investments in advanced tech in China. While South Korea's finance ministry expects limited impact on domestic industries, markets remain cautious.
And what are some other implications of these tariffs outside the industrial setting?
So the reason why Trump's tariff policies are appealing to some voters in the U.S. is because they think that if these tariffs are imposed on foreign products, this will increase the price of these imports to make domestic goods more competitive. However, economists say that this additional cost could be passed down to businesses and consumers.
Trump's proposed policies, even though perhaps they're not as specific as Harris's announced policies, will have higher inflationary measures.
An estimate from an American think tank tallied the annual cost of the proposed tariffs at $2,600 for a typical American household. This comes as manufacturers using imported materials may face higher costs, which they could then transfer to buyers by raising prices on products. And products with limited domestic alternatives could become even more expensive for consumers. This could have a global impact if interest rates are increased to tackle inflation, as central banks around the world, including the Bank of Korea, look to the Federal Reserve's monetary policies.
Right. Thank you, Arirang, for the update.
Thank you for having me.
Korea's industrial output shrank on month in September, as did the country's retail sales, while facility investment rebounded. Lee Soo-jun covers the latest findings.
South Korea's industrial output fell once again in September on weaker chip production, while consumption also remained sluggish. Data from Statistics Korea on Thursday showed that industrial production dropped 0.3% in September compared to the month before. The decrease seen last month comes after the country recorded a rise of 1.3% for the first time in 4 months in August. A breakdown of the data showed that semiconductor production dropped 2.6% on month, with falls in the production of system semiconductors and silicon wafers, leading to a decline in overall mining and manufacturing production. While manufacturing production alone dropped 0.1% after seeing an increase in August, taking into account the number of working days, the sector saw a rise in September as well. Production in the service sector fell 0.7% last month after seeing a rise for 3 straight months. Retail sales, which indicate trends in goods consumption, also fell 0.4% on month after seeing a rise in August. And this was mostly attributed to lower sales of non-durable goods such as food and beverages, as well as semi-durable goods like shoes and bags. As for investment, the data showed that facility investment, on the other hand, rose compared to the previous month on greater investment in machinery, despite the decrease seen in transportation equipment investment. But construction investment remained weak as construction activity showed a downward trend for the 5th straight month in September.
What is notable about investment is that facility investment is showing a significant increase. And although construction activities declined, orders have been rising for 2 consecutive quarters, indicating that a recovery can be expected in the future.
The official says that while there was a drop in production last month, it was still showing a solid and stable trend, but added that consumption has yet to show signs of recovery. 이수진, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics has reported a 40% plunge on quarter in chip profits, raking in 3.9 trillion won in the third quarter. The profit is lower than market projections, and the chipmaker has linked the weaker than expected performance to a number of factors, including lackluster demand for personal computers and smartphones and the weak dollar. To bolster profitability, Samsung has pledged to focus on the production of high-end chips. In total, the company posted an operating profit of 9.2 trillion won in the third quarter and sales of 79.1 trillion won. South Korea's national tax revenue recorded a sharp decline for the first 9 months of the year. Data from the Finance Ministry released on Thursday showed that revenue from January to September fell more than 11 trillion won, or around $8 billion compared to the same period last year. This was mostly attributed to the fall in corporate tax collected due to operating losses suffered by large conglomerates. When compared to the budget for this year, the revenue collected accounted for around 69%, lower than the 77.5% recorded during the same period last year. In other news, K-pop artist G-Dragon has released a new song after around a 7-year break. His agency, Galaxy Corporation, announced on Thursday that the musician dropped the single Power at 6 p.m. Korean time. This is his first solo release in 7 years and 4 months since his mini-album 권지용 in 2017. The song Power talks about the influence of media and the blending of different types of power within a catchy beat and intense rap. After a chilly morning, the temperature rose to 20 degrees Celsius in Seoul today, far exceeding the average level by more than 5 degrees. The whole country will surpass 20 degrees in the middle of the day tomorrow. However, after the sun goes down, temperatures will drop quickly. Even though Typhoon Kongray will not have a direct impact on the Korean peninsula, the rain clouds left by the typhoon move over the south coast and Jeju Island. In particular, heavy rain of up to 250 millimeters is expected in the mountainous areas of Jeju Island, and more than 80 is expected on the south coast. Tomorrow, Chuncheon will start off at 10 degrees, Gwangju 14 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 18 in Chuncheon, Gwangju, Daegu, and Gyeongju. From next week, daytime temperatures will drop to around 10 degrees, and morning temperatures will drop to around 3 degrees, making it cold. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. And that is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
요즘 한국에선 어떻게 노는지 알려줄까?
한국에선 아이돌이 되어볼 수도 인생 번호를 찾을 수도 있지.
제일 핫한 포토 스팟은 여기.
한국은 분명 너에게 새로운 영감을 줄 거야.
이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸? 진짜 한국에선 어떻게 먹는지 알려줄까?
K-바비큐? 신김치랑 먹어야지.
치킨? 치맥 페스티벌은 처음이지?
김치? 종류만큼 먹는 법도 가지각색.
김밥? 시장에선, 산에선, 바다에선 이렇게.
국밥? 취향 따라, 입맛 따라.
이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸?
How to survive in Korea. Barbecue restaurants. Step 1. Taking care of your clothes. Put your jacket in the plastic bag. Seal it tight. If the stool flips open, store your clothes inside. Wearing light colors? Grab an apron. It's the best defense against oil splatter and smoke. Step 2. Bottomless side dishes. Basic side dishes at a barbecue restaurant. Eat, and eat as much as you want. Side dishes come with free refills. Oh, and if you don't see this sign, just ask, 사장님, 여기 밑반찬 좀 더 주세요. Simple, isn't it? Step 3. Grilling meat. There are various kinds of samgyeopsal in Korea. Place the meat on the grill. Turn it over when golden. And again when it looks done. Again and again and again. Step 4. Sam style. You aren't taking bites of sam like a taco, are you? In Korea, we have it in one bite. A pro tip here. Add only as much as you can handle in a bite. Gotta avoid awkward situations. Step 5. Enjoy the perks. After the meal, enjoy the perks offered as a Korean restaurant. Fabric refreshers get rid of the barbecue smell, while mint candies freshen your breath. Did you survive the barbecue restaurant? Hang on. Are you here with someone you want to impress? Then let's skip the garlic. Who knows what will happen?
오래전 바닷길로 떠났던 당신이 세상 역경을 이기고 대한민국의 힘이 되어 하늘길로 돌아옵니다. 머나먼 타국에서 가슴 깊이 그리던 조국. 대한민국의 품으로 우리 동포들이 돌아오는 그날이 오면 배웅한 곳에서 맞이하겠습니다.
Hello and welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing global issues into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. South Korea has been suffering from a chronic low birth rate. It's been a decades-long problem, but in a glimmer of hope, Statistics Korea has revealed that the number of births in the country surpassed 20,000 for 2 straight months from July. This is largely attributed to a surge in couples tying the knot, as the figure jumped 20% on year in August. The latest figures highlight the shifting social norms and lifestyles among South Korean younger generations who increasingly delay or forego marriage and parenthood amid significant demographic challenges. Today on Within the Frame, we delve into the reasons behind this trend, the shifting perceptions of marriage and childbirth among the younger generations, and the crucial policy measures needed to sustain this hopeful turnaround. For this, we are joined by Choi Han-sun, a professor at the Department of Public Administration at Myeongji University. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
And also joining us is Kim Jo-eun, assistant professor at the KDI School of Public Policy and Management. Great to have you, Professor.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's first begin with Professor Choi. For starters, can you explain for us how serious is the low birth rate issue in South Korea?
Yes, it is very serious. A columnist of the New York Times, Ross Dout, a couple of years ago, compare the birth rate of the Korea and decline of the population with the population decline in the middle age when the Black Death struck, which means we are maybe the more the decline than the middle-age time. Recently, also Elon Musk may be worried about South Korea declining. He said maybe 1/3 of our population will go, something like that. In 2002, we already had 1.17 birth rate, which is lower than the standard rate of the 1.3 of the lowest maybe birth rate of the countries. So which is also in the 2021, we have 0.81 the birth rate, which is the world record in the maybe in terms of the lowest birth rate. So it is very serious. We must tackle this issue.
Right. And amid this serious situation, Statistics Korea says the number of births in South Korea surpassed 20,000, like I said, for July and August, marking an increase for 2 consecutive months. Professor Kim, what does the current birth rate increase signify, and what does a rise for the second month indicate?
So while it's encouraging to see birth exceeding 20,000 for 2 consecutive months in July and August, we need to be very cautious about interpreting these numbers. And first and foremost, we must understand that an increase in the number of births does not automatically translate into an increase in total fertility rate. So what we are seeing could simply be the results of having more marriages during this period. And in fact, recent statistics shows that the number of married couples increased, so which likely explain this rise in birth numbers. So, however, this is distinct from the total fertility rate, which is really what we need to focus on. The total fertility rate measures the average number of children women are expected to have during their reproductive years. So this is our key indicator of long-term population sustainability. So looking at these monthly numbers, 20,000 births per month, it's simply too early to determine whether this will significantly impact our total fertility rates. So we should be careful not to overly optimistic about future fertility trends based on these short-term figures.
Right. Then, but Professor, you mentioned fertility rates. So could this figures, the rise for the past 2 months, be a signal of opportunity for a rebound in terms of fertility rate then?
I am, again, still very cautious about this thing because total fertility rate, in order to be reflected in total fertility rate, it's too short a time. Total fertility rate is a much more complex measure that requires a combination of understanding of age structure and then the distribution of gender population within the age structure. So I wouldn't interpret these short-term changes as fertility rebound in South Korea. So we need longer time frame to see what's actually going on in South Korea.
2 months is a very short time. Now, in addition to this, as many of us would know, earlier surveys indicated that the younger generations had a negative perception of marriage and childbirth, but recent investigations by the Low Birth Rate Committee have detected some changes. Professor Kim, what did the recent surveys reveal, and what might be the reasons for this change?
So I actually had a chance to look at this data. And let me start with what hasn't changed much. So general perception of marriage being positive only increased by 0.6%, so which frankly isn't statistically significant. So we cannot say there has been a real shift in how people view marriage itself. What's more interesting is the changes in people's actual intentions to marry and have children. The data shows some notable shift. So looking at the overall sample, we saw marriage intentions increase from 61% to nearly 65%. And among those people, childless population, the intentions to have children also increase. But what I find particularly noteworthy is women's marital intentions just jumped from 48% to 60%. So now the last number, an 11% increase in just 6 months might seem very dramatic change. And while some people are arguing that this is due to recent government policy initiatives and interventions, but I think, again, we need to be very careful about drawing such conclusion because 6 months is really too short a time to see genuine policy effects. These kind of social policy and changes typically needs more time to manifest. And second is that these statistics are highly dependent on population characteristics. So there's a possibility that recent samples simply includes more people who are already inclined to have children and marry. And another thing is I'm having trouble identifying any major societal changes in these 6 months that will explain such sudden change in marital intentions. And finally, we need to remember that expressing an intention to marry and have children doesn't automatically translate into action. People need both material and non-material conditions to be right before they take important, significant life steps. So while these numbers are certainly interesting and worth monitoring, I wouldn't want to make any definitive conclusion based on such a short-term change.
Wow, Professor, thank you so much for the clear explanation of the latest survey. Now, despite these kinds of concerns, the presidential office has described the increase in births for the past 2 months as very hopeful, stating that signals of a turnaround in low birth rates are beginning to emerge. Professor Che, what about you? Do you believe this trend of increasing births would continue?
Yeah, probably this is a good news, we can say, but I agree with Professor Kim. We should be very careful, cautious about it is a real trend for the future. But still, we have 95% of the 20s not married yet, and maybe 51% of the 30s also not married yet. More seriously, I think in Seoul, 63% of the 30 years they also not married, which means in terms of the social structure and the population structure, we are not good shape for the maybe population increase for the future. So I think maybe it's too early, and maybe we say this is a good signals.
Right, so it's too early to jump into conclusions. Then, in order to transform the increase in births into a turning point for low birth rates, what kind of changes are needed to be made in societal structures, Professor Kim?
While government support for workers' work-life balance is crucial, because current government is really pushing forward to making workers' work-life balance improving, and research remains mixed regarding the effectiveness of such initiatives in increasing fertility rates and fertility intentions. significant concerns still persist, particularly among male workers, about penalties associated with taking family leave and then flexible work arrangements. Using such policies is often perceived as demonstrating a lack of loyalty and commitment to the employer, especially for male workers. This suggests that without challenging the deeply embedded workplace norms about what constitutes an ideal worker, the effectiveness of these policies may remain limited. And moreover, while work-family balance is important, we also need to address labor market instability and predictability. So many young adults struggle to establish themselves financially, and this economic uncertainty makes them extremely difficult to commit to long-term relationship, not to mention a marriage or childbearing. So when individuals cannot envision their circumstances, their own circumstances in the labor market, family formation becomes an unattainable dream. So government have to focus on not just improving work-life balance, but also stabilizing the labor market for young people.
Right. So improving work-life balance and stabilizing working conditions is crucial in this aspect. Now, amid this kind of situation, the Low Birth Rate and Aging Society Committee recently held its 5th emergency meeting on population and announced some measures to address low birth rates. What were some of the noteworthy policies, Professor Che?
I think it is a better shape than before. For example, there is some incentive for the small and middle-sized company if they provide more the good environment and condition for the young couples or the parents for the child care and the birth. That is very good because it's a very realistic. But in the maybe the previous policies are too much about the ideal but not realistic. But now we have see some realistic progress. I think that there's a good shape, but it's not yet good enough. Also, there are culture and the structure, and we must understand about our young generations. So I think the committee need to more investigate and hear about what they want, and then how they can shape the policy, like a well-made, tailor-made policy we need.
Right. So you're saying these measures that the government has announced are not quite enough to solve this problem?
Not yet.
Not yet. What about you, Professor Kim? How do you evaluate the new policy tasks presented in the latest meeting?
So I also agree with the Professor Choi that there has been an improvement, but it's not enough. This is particularly because it's not really touching upon men's involvement in housework. So in recent years, demographers argue that achieving a second gender revolution is critical for improving fertility rates in these high-income countries, including South Korea. So the first gender revolution involved women entering the workforce, and the second gender revolution involved men entering into the home and domestic sphere. So although current policies like extensive childcare leave and subsidies are intended to promote more egalitarian share of paid and unpaid labor between men and women, there are some concerns that these policies actually might paradoxically reinforce gender inequality. This is because women are likely to be the primary users of flexible work arrangement and childcare leave. You know, South Korea is currently providing one of the most generous parental leave, including for men, but the men's utilization rate is extremely low compared to women. So while the government's initiatives are commendable, they need to focus on involving men into the domestic sphere, including, I'm talking about family sphere, and other countries, for example, offer potential models. For example, Switzerland implemented a daddy quota system where a certain proportion of parental leave are reserved exclusively for fathers. And there are also discussions about mandatory childcare leave for men, which could help reduce the perceived stigma or penalties associated with taking such leave for men. And furthermore, as previously mentioned, South Korea needs to challenge its fundamental workplace norm that prioritize work over family responsibilities and normalizing long work hours. South Korea is famous for having longest work hours within the OECD countries. So unfortunately, this emergency population meeting lacks substantial discussion about transforming these workplace norms, a critical oversight given that these cultural expectations are a key barrier to achieving egalitarian gender relations, work-family arrangements, and potentially higher fertility rates.
Right. So, Professor Kim, as you mentioned about men participating in paternity leave and getting some penalty from their companies, and this is not surprising here in South Korea. Are there ways for the government to interfere in that kind of aspect for companies not to give them some kind of penalty, some ways like that?
So there's one potential way. So there has been a discussion that, in these HR records, if you take a parental leave or family-related leave, then these leave records are recorded in your CV. But they argue that we shouldn't do that. So we cannot track these employers' previous employment history, including taking leave. And also the second one is, as I mentioned, the mandatory father's leave. Unless we make it mandatory for every fathers in the workplace, then it's going to be extremely difficult to eliminate the workplace stigma associated men taking leave. So, there has been a lot of empirical research showing that if women take parental leave, then the employers will expect that, okay, she did whatever she had to do. But if men take leave, then there has been some sort of a negative evaluations about men's work performance. So it is critical that government should start discussing about mandatory leave, which could create some controversy, but way to bring men into the domestic sphere.
Right, that's a good idea. Now, at this point, as Professor Kim just touched upon, at this point, many would wonder, is this low birth rate only a serious problem here in South Korea? How are other countries coping with theirs, Professor Che?
Yeah, I think that already the developed country suffered a lot about this low birth rate. Also, they tried to fix it a very long time. So many policy we may interested is take a long time, like 10 years and several decades. But I can say that but the United States, maybe in 2024, it is expected only 1.786 birth rate, but it is also expected their population increase 0.53% from the 2023, which means they have a low birth rate, but because of the immigration policy, their population is still increasing. So maybe in short term, I would say in many developed countries using the maybe more positive, more aggressive the immigration policy, but in the long term, maybe we need to change many things and we making the better culture. Also, I'm very curious, maybe in East Asia countries like Japan, China, Taiwan, and Singapore, most like developed country in the East Asia also suffered very low the birth rate, which means very interesting. Maybe we're making too much maybe chips or the I don't know, but in the countries in the East Asia, which has a very intensive economic growth, they suffered also for very low birth rate.
Right, so this chronic birth rate is not only a problem in South Korea, it's also a problem globally. So with this, there should be some legal efforts to resolve this problem, I guess. So the legal bill to establish a population strategy planning division, which would control low birth rate policies, was introduced last July, but it had not passed through South Korea's National Assembly Standing Committee. Will the increase in births give some momentum to discussions about establishing this division?
Maybe, unfortunately, not. I think that I would devil in the detail. So I think maybe the legislation is a very delicate job. Also, now the ruling party also only have like a minority, and then the opposition party, Democratic Party, has they have almost 2/3 of the assemblymen, which means I think the president to get out and shake hands and talk and communication, and government need to explain to the opposition part Party about what we need and that this is very urgent. And the opposition party knew that it is very urgent, but there is no details. Also, there is no negotiation about the details. So I'm not sure. Maybe in the short future, the bill will be passed. It is very maybe pessimistic now. Yeah.
Right. Then what about Professor Kim? Aside from this specific legislation, do you think there could be other efforts to help the birth rate here in South Korea go on a surging path?
I think South Korean government is doing their best to increase fertility rates, and I don't know what to ask more. And I think the policy interventions now should, as I mentioned, repetitively mentioned, to actively talk about men's role in the family. And otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to challenge fertility decline. And another thing is, so most of the time, this government policy is aimed at promoting work-family balance for married couple who already have successfully married and then have intentions to have child. But the thing is, the key source of South Korea experiencing below 1 total fertility rate is because South Korea, there has been growing population of young adults who are resisting to marry. So resisting to marry, promoting work-life balance for people and then providing all these monetary benefits to having children, it's not going to make young people to marry. So there has been another problem in Korea regarding dating market. So the Korean government have to also look into what could be the problem that, the obstacle that young people, single people face in the Korean dating market to increase.
It's not only just the birth rate that matters. It's connected to the dating and the past traditions that South Korea has been observing in the past. All right, Professor, we will have to end it right here. Professor Che and Professor Kim, thank you so much for your time and your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again for joining us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.
There is no greater blessing than to have good health as you grow old. Even though my mom is over